My own family tried to sacrifice my 4-year-old daughter to fund a fake cryptocurrency empire. My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. Before I show you exactly how I turned my brother's stolen tech empire into digital ash, welcome to Sweet Life Drama. Please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Also, drop your current age and location in the comments section below. I want to know the age of the people watching this unfold today. Now, let me take you back to the exact moment I looked at the dark screen of my phone and finalized my blueprint for their destruction. The sharp beep of the billing terminal pierced the quiet hum of the pediatric intensive care unit. I stared at the small digital screen. A single red word flashed back at me: declined. My hand hovered over the plastic counter. Just a few feet away, my 4-year-old daughter Lily lay hooked to a tangle of transparent tubes, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. Under emergency protocols, the surgical team was already scrubbing in to save her life. But the hospital administrator standing across the desk tapped her keyboard, her expression shifting from polite concern to rigid protocol. She informed me my primary health insurance was suspended because my automated premium payments had bounced for the past 3 months. My bank accounts were completely frozen due to severe delinquent credit activity. Because of this, Lily's out-of-network top-tier pediatric cardiologist and the crucial weeks of specialized post-op care were no longer covered. To keep her in this facility with the best team, instead of transferring her fragile body to a crowded, underfunded county ward the second she stabilized, the required out-of-pocket deposit was $150,000. I stepped away from the desk. My fingers felt numb as I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my mother, Victoria. I expected panic. I expected her to rush to the hospital. When she answered, I put the phone on speaker, holding it close to my ear. Her voice carried over the line, crisp and unbothered, accompanied by the clinking of fine china. I explained the situation. I told her Lily was out of time and my accounts were frozen. I begged for a temporary loan. Victoria took a slow sip of whatever she was drinking. She did not ask about her granddaughter. Instead, she let out a short, dismissive sigh. She stated that my financial ruin was not a system error. She admitted, with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, that she and my younger brother Chase had utilized my social security number 6 months ago. They needed capital to secure servers for Ethereum, his new cryptocurrency exchange. They took out $200,000 in high-interest unsecured loans using my identity. The creditors had finally caught up, triggering an automatic freeze on all my linked assets. A sharp burst of laughter echoed in the background of the call. It was Chase. He leaned into the receiver, his voice dripping with unearned arrogance. He told me a good sister sacrifices for her brother's empire. He advised me to figure out the hospital bill myself because his startup was launching its initial coin offering on Friday, and he could not be distracted by my domestic issues. The line went dead with a hollow click. I stood in the sterile corridor, the smell of industrial bleach suddenly suffocating me. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the laminate counter. My knees buckled. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white as I fought a sudden, violent wave of nausea. I couldn't breathe. Through the glass window of the intensive care unit, I could see Lily's tiny, fragile chest struggling to rise beneath a tangle of tubes. A raw, primal terror ripped through me, the agonizing realization that my little girl was slipping away, and my own blood had just severed her lifeline. A ragged, broken sob tore from my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting the hot tears of a desperate, terrified mother fall onto the cold linoleum floor. I allowed myself exactly 10 seconds to shatter. Because as the tears fell, the echo of my mother's casual sigh and my brother's mocking laugh played back in my mind. The hot, suffocating panic in my veins began to freeze. The profound grief of their betrayal crystallized, slicing through the final remaining threads of my familial loyalty. When I opened my eyes, the weeping mother was gone, replaced by a cold, hyper-focused clarity. They hadn't just weaponized my identity to fund a digital ledger. They had put a price tag on my daughter's life. They thought they had cornered a helpless single mother. They assumed my quiet nature meant I was weak. They did not know I was a senior cybersecurity architect specializing in federal threat mitigation. They did not know that just 4 hours prior to Lily collapsing, I had quietly finalized the sale of my proprietary cybersecurity software to a major private defense contractor for $30 million. I spent my days building impenetrable digital fortresses and dismantling hostile networks. The massive, fully liquid buyout payment had cleared into my isolated private corporate account just 4 hours prior. A financial fortress Chase's amateur identity theft couldn't even detect, let alone breach. Chase loved to brag online about his untraceable decentralized network. But as a security architect, I knew the truth about startup cryptocurrency farms. They required immense physical hardware. They needed cooling systems, industrial power grids, and centralized server racks. He was relying on physical data centers that could be bought, sold, and unplugged. The clinical clerk cleared her throat, breaking the heavy silence. "Ma'am, I need an answer. Do I call the transport team or do you have a method of payment?" Before I could respond, the emergency room entrance sensors triggered. The heavy double glass doors parted with a mechanical hiss. A brutal gust of December wind tore through the lobby, carrying a flurry of snow and the bitter chill of the New York winter. A woman stumbled through the threshold. It was Chloe, Chase's wife. She did not look like the spouse of a rising Silicon Valley tech founder. She wore faded blue pediatric scrubs, thoroughly soaked from the storm. Her dark, natural curls were plastered to her cheeks, heavy with melting snow. She hugged her arms tightly across her chest, her teeth chattering so loud I could hear them over the hum of the lobby vending machines. Chloe spotted me standing by the billing desk. Relief washed over her exhausted features. She practically sprinted across the slick linoleum floor, her worn sneakers squeaking sharply with every frantic step. She did not stop to catch her breath. She unzipped the damp front pocket of her scrub top and shoved a crumpled bank envelope into my hands. "Take it!" Chloe panted, her chest heaving. "Take it right now! For Lily!" I looked down at the envelope. It was torn at the edges, stuffed with disorganized $20 and $50 bills. Resting right on top of the worn paper currency was a heavy, vintage gold band. I recognized that ring. It belonged to her late grandmother. It was the only heirloom Chloe possessed, the one piece of jewelry she treasured more than her own wedding ring. I tried to press the envelope back into her freezing palms. "Chloe, I cannot take your grandmother's ring." "How did you even get down here? The interstate is buried under 6 inches of snow." Chloe shook her head, refusing to take the items back. She wrapped her shivering arms around her waist, glancing nervously toward the sliding glass doors, as if expecting someone to follow her. "I took the crosstown bus," she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain of the freezing temperature. "It took 3 hours. I had to walk the last 12 blocks because the route shut down for the storm." My brow furrowed. "You took the public transit? Where is your car? Where is Chase?" The mention of my brother's name caused a dark shadow to fall over her eyes. She looked down at her cheap, soaking wet shoes. "Chase took my car keys last week," she confessed, her voice dropping to a hollow, defeated pitch. "He said the insurance premiums were a waste of his startup capital. He routes my entire nursing paycheck directly into a private offshore account. I do not have a debit card, Maya. He gives me a $50 cash allowance every Sunday for groceries. If I buy a coffee, he screams at me for hours about disrupting his financial vision." The clinical detachment I had maintained since my mother's phone call fractured, replaced by a razor-sharp, freezing rage. My brother was not just the thief who stole my social security number to fund a cryptocurrency exchange. He was a financial predator. He was suffocating this brilliant, hard-working internal medicine nurse, trapping her in a cycle of economic abuse to fund his delusions of grandeur. He boasted online about signing leases for luxury Manhattan penthouses while his wife rode a freezing city bus through a blizzard just to hand me her last scrap of dignity. "He didn't just find out about your accounts tonight," Chloe continued, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes, mingling with the melting snow on her face. "Hours ago, I heard him laughing on the phone with your mother. He was bragging that the bank had officially frozen your assets. They knew Lily's surgery was tonight, and they were actively celebrating that you were going to hit a financial brick wall. I knew you were trapped here. I waited until he went into his home office, grabbed the emergency cash I hid in the floorboards, and ran. I prayed I would make it through the storm before the hospital asked you for the deposit. The pawn shop across the street from this hospital is open 24 hours. They will give you $3,000 for the gold ring. It is not enough for the whole surgery, but maybe it will convince the doctors to start the procedure. I stared at the remarkable woman standing in front of me. My own blood relatives had left my 4-year-old daughter to suffer over a stolen credit line. Yet Chloe, a woman systematically drained and terrorized by my brother, had risked frostbite and his wrath to offer me her most precious possession. The debt was settled in my mind. Chase had crossed the line that required a scorched earth response. I reached out and gently uncurled Chloe's frozen fingers. I pressed the crumpled bank envelope and the vintage gold ring firmly back into her palm. "Keep your grandmother's ring, Chloe," I said, my voice steady, carrying a quiet, dangerous authority. Before she could protest, I turned back to the billing clerk. The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow, clearly impatient with the family drama unfolding in her lobby. "Ma'am, the surgical team is operating under emergency mandate, but if you cannot provide the $150,000 deposit for her post-op care, I will have to notify the transport team," the clerk stated, her tone dripping with bureaucratic apathy. "We will have to prep her for a high-risk transfer to the state facility the moment she is off the table." I unzipped the inner compartment of my leather handbag. I bypassed the standard debit cards Chase had compromised and pulled out a solid matte black rectangle. It was an invite-only private wealth titanium card tied directly to my offshore executive trust. I placed the heavy metal card onto the laminate counter. The clerk blinked, her apathetic expression faltering as she took in the weight and the discreet elite banking crest etched into the corner of the metal. She slid the chip into the terminal. No loading screen, no processing delay. A sharp, instantaneous beep echoed through the lobby. The terminal flashed green. Approved. The clerk's posture changed immediately. She handed the card back with both hands, offering a polite practice smile. "The transaction is complete, ma'am," she stammered. "I will cancel the transfer orders immediately. The chief pediatric cardiologist is secured for her entire recovery, and I am locking in her private post-operative suite now." I slipped the card back into my bag and turned to face Chloe. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly parted, unable to comprehend what had just happened. She knew my brother had drained my civilian accounts. She thought I was ruined. "Maya, how did you—" Chloe stammered, glancing at the billing desk. "Chase thinks he outsmarted a helpless single mother," I said, stepping closer to her, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "He thinks his little decentralized coin offering makes him untouchable, but he forgot that I build digital fortresses for the federal government. I just closed a major contract, Chloe. I have resources he cannot even fathom." I reached out and brushed a stray snowflake from her damp shoulder. "You risked everything to come here tonight," I told her, holding her gaze. "You showed me who the real family is. Now, I need you to go back to that penthouse, sneak back into bed before he notices you are gone. Endure his arrogance for just a few more days." Chloe shivered, clutching the envelope to her chest. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to execute a structural audit," I replied, the corners of my mouth tightening into a grim, predatory line. "Chase launches his Ethereum IPO this Friday. By the time that launch party ends, your husband will not have a single penny left to his name. He will never trap you or anyone else ever again." Chloe searched my face, looking for any sign of doubt. Finding none, she gave a slow, resolute nod. She turned and walked back out into the raging winter storm, leaving me alone in the quiet hospital lobby. The immediate crisis of Lily's surgery was resolved. The biological threat to my child was neutralized. Now the battlefield shifted to my territory. I walked down the quiet corridor toward the pediatric intensive care unit, finding an empty chair in the waiting alcove just outside Lily's room. The surgical team was already wheeling her bed down the hall toward the operating theater. I watched the heavy doors swing shut behind them, taking a deep, calculated breath. I opened my leather bag and pulled out my encrypted workstation. Chase constantly bragged on social media about his untraceable, decentralized blockchain.
He sold his investors a story of an impenetrable, cloud-based crypto utopia. But my entire career was built on finding the physical vulnerabilities in digital fairy tales. Every single line of code requires a server. Every server requires power. Every power grid requires a physical location. I booted up the laptop, the screen casting a pale blue glow over my face. I bypassed the standard firewalls and initiated a deep packet trace on the Ethereum network's public IP headers. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing the silent, methodical hunt for the physical anchor of his fraudulent empire. The hunt had begun, and the data was about to tell me exactly where to strike. The rhythmic, steady hum of the pediatric ventilator replaced the chaotic alarms of the emergency room. I sat in the dim corner of the private post-operative suite, my eyes fixed on the slow, measured rise and fall of Lily's chest. The cardiac surgeon had finished the valve repair an hour ago. The monitors displayed strong, consistent vitals. Her skin had regained a healthy, flushed tone. The biological threat was neutralized. I turned away from the hospital bed. I reached into my leather bag and retrieved my encrypted workstation. I rested the heavy metal chassis on my knees. The screen illuminated the dark alcove with a pale blue glow, casting long shadows against the sterile hospital walls. My fingers brushed across the keyboard, bypassing the standard biometric locks and accessing my secure federal terminal. Chase spent his days curating the persona of an untouchable Silicon Valley prodigy. He filled his social media feeds with jargon-heavy posts about the future of decentralized finance. He claimed Ethereum was an impenetrable, distributed blockchain, a digital utopia hosted across thousands of independent global nodes. He sold his investors the illusion of a network that could never be taken offline, bragging that traditional financial institutions were fragile and obsolete. I opened a new command terminal. Public relations campaigns work on gullible venture capitalists. They do not work on structural security architects. Every digital ledger requires a physical anchor. Cryptocurrencies demand immense computational power to verify transactions, process cryptographic hashes, and maintain network integrity. They require specialized hardware, industrial-grade cooling systems, and megawatts of continuous electricity. You cannot host a multi-million-dollar financial exchange on a scattered network of personal laptops. I initiated a deep packet trace, targeting Ethereum's public-facing IP headers. Lines of green code began cascading down my black screen, a digital waterfall of routing protocols and server responses. I bypassed his superficial front-end firewalls within seconds. They were commercial-grade, bought off the shelf, providing nothing but a thin illusion of security meant to impress amateur investors. I watched the routing data compile. If Ethereum were truly decentralized, the packet trace would splinter, pinging off encrypted servers in Tokyo, London, Frankfurt, and Singapore. The geographic distribution would look like a sprawling, chaotic web, impossible to pinpoint or shut down. The data finished compiling. The geographic map rendered on my screen, dropping a single glowing red pin. There was no sprawling web. The digital traffic did not bounce across the globe. Every single data packet, every user transaction, and every piece of encrypted client information funneled directly into one specific geographic coordinate. The entire network converged on a single physical location in Ashburn, Virginia. Chase had not built a decentralized blockchain. To save the exorbitant costs of true distributed hosting, he had cut a fatal amateur corner. He was running the entire Ethereum infrastructure out of a centralized Tier 4 data center. His billion-dollar digital empire existed inside one fragile concrete warehouse. He had lied to his investors, his creditors, and the public. I ran a quick query on the facility's registered owner, a mid-sized infrastructure management firm. I accessed the federal bankruptcy court database and pulled their latest corporate filings. The results loaded instantly, painting a grim financial picture. The data center was bleeding cash. 3 weeks ago, the management firm had officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring. They were drowning in operational debt, desperate for immediate liquidity to keep their heavy cooling towers and power grids running. A failing data center meant cheap, desperate leasing contracts for ambitious tech founders,
Chase had found a sinking ship and decided to store his entire fraudulent fortune in its cargo hold. But leasing a dedicated server farm of that scale still required significant upfront capital. The stolen credit lines using my social security number provided enough cash to cover basic software development and luxury penthouse rentals, but they were not nearly enough to secure a physical Tier 4 infrastructure contract. The data center would have demanded a heavy, tangible collateral deposit to allow a high-risk crypto startup into their facility, especially while they were navigating bankruptcy court. I pivoted my search parameters, shifting my focus from corporate infrastructure to county real estate ledgers. I pulled the property records from my mother's pristine, manicured suburban estate. Victoria prided herself on owning that sprawling property free and clear. It was the crown jewel of her country club persona, the physical manifestation of her perceived superiority. She had gladly let my daughter face a fatal heart condition rather than risk a fraction of her wealth. The county database refreshed. A new digital stamp appeared on her property deed, officially filed just 14 days ago. It was a mezzanine lien, a highly predatory second mortgage. I analyzed the lender information attached to the lien. It was not a traditional commercial bank. It was a boutique private equity firm operating out of an unmarked office in Lower Manhattan. In my line of work, we refer to them as shadow lenders. They are organizations that provide immediate, high-interest cash to desperate clients who cannot pass standard financial underwriting. They do not send polite collection notices when a payment is missed. They seize assets with ruthless efficiency. The financial architecture of my brother's scheme was laid bare on my glowing screen. Chase had convinced Victoria to leverage her prized estate, using her home as the hard collateral required to secure a short-term, high-interest loan from the shadow lenders. He took that toxic cash and handed it to a bankrupt data center in Virginia to lease the physical servers hosting his fake decentralized network. He had constructed a fragile, highly volatile house of cards. The tension in his system was stretched to the breaking point. The shadow lenders would demand their exorbitant interest payments soon. The bankrupt data center would require their monthly leasing fees to keep the power grid online. I opened his company's public prospectus. Ethereum's initial coin offering was scheduled for this coming Friday. The launch party was his only exit strategy. Chase was betting his entire fraudulent ecosystem on a successful Friday night IPO. He needed the influx of public investor capital to pay off the shadow lenders, release the lien on his mother's house, and secure a permanent lease with the data center before the entire infrastructure collapsed under its own weight. He had exposed his throat. His investors believed they were buying into a decentralized, untouchable future. Victoria believed she was funding a genius visionary, risking her beloved mansion for a guaranteed return. Neither of them realized that the physical switch to their entire financial universe was sitting in a failing warehouse in Virginia, waiting for someone to walk in and flip it. The puzzle pieces clicked together, forming a perfect, devastating picture. Chase relied on the assumption that no one would look past the flashy crypto terminology and the expensive tailored suits. He assumed his sister was just a struggling mother, crushed by medical debt and family rejection. He failed to consider that the woman whose identity he stole spent her career dismantling hostile digital networks. I closed the public records database and opened a secure communication channel. I did not need to involve the police or file a lengthy civil lawsuit. I did not need to argue with my mother about her twisted favoritism. The data provided a clean, surgical strike. The biological crisis threatening my daughter was over. The silent audit was complete. It was time to execute the structural demolition. The glow of the laptop screen cast a pale light across the quiet hospital waiting area. I closed the encrypted workstation, the metal hinge clicking shut with a sharp, decisive sound. Filing a standard police report for identity theft meant surrendering control to local detectives. It meant waiting months for subpoenas while Victoria deployed her high-priced defense attorneys to drown the case in endless civil litigation. They wanted a slow, bureaucratic fight. They wanted to drag my name through family court, forcing me to beg for restitution while Chase launched his initial coin offering untouched. I refused to play their game. I needed a surgical strike. I opened my secure communication channel and dialed the direct line to the primary legal counsel for Aegis Security, LLC. Aegis was a classified holding firm I established years ago to manage sensitive federal infrastructure contracts. The attorney answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and alert despite the early morning hour. I gave him a concise set of instructions. We were not going to sue my brother. We were going to buy the ground he stood on. The Bankrupt data center in Ashburn, Virginia was desperate for immediate liquidity. Their Chapter 11 restructuring was failing, and the facility managers were facing imminent power grid shutoffs due to unpaid utility bills. I instructed my counsel to execute an aggressive emergency debtor-in-possession financing agreement. We were not going to illegally bypass the bankruptcy judge to force a real estate transfer. Instead, we offered the desperate facility management $12 million in clean, immediate liquidity as an emergency DIP loan to save their operations. I demanded a non-disclosure agreement wrapped in layers of strict corporate anonymity. Chase could never know who became his host's primary creditor until I chose to reveal myself. The legal machinery moved with precise, unyielding efficiency. By dawn, while Chase was sleeping, my legal team filed an expedited motion with the federal bankruptcy court. The data center was hours away from a total power grid shutoff due to unpaid utility bills. We presented a ruthless but perfectly legal ultimatum to the judge and the creditors' committee. We provide an immediate emergency cash injection to keep the lights on, and in exchange for the DIP loan, the court grants Aegis Security a super priority administrative lien, including absolute, exclusive operational oversight of the server infrastructure to protect our collateral. Faced with an imminent blackout that would destroy their remaining value, the judge approved the emergency covenants before the morning sun even crested the horizon. I sat in the hospital cafeteria, sipping a bitter cup of black coffee, watching the digital confirmation roll across my tablet screen. The transition of power was silent and invisible. No alarms sounded, no public announcements were made. The transaction records populated my secure drive. I read through the finalized deeds and the transferred commercial leases. I was now the apex predator of their infrastructure. I held the senior liens to the facility. I controlled the management firm's emergency purse strings. But most importantly, I possessed the absolute administrative authority over the industrial cooling towers pumping chilled air through the facility and the high-speed fiber optic cables connecting the building to the global internet. Every single byte of data Chase processed for Ethereum routed through copper wiring and silicon boards that now belonged to me. He had built his fraudulent empire inside a physical fortress, unaware that I had just purchased the deed to the front gate. My phone vibrated against the laminate surface of the cafeteria table. I picked it up, swiping away the lock screen. A new message from Victoria appeared. It was a high-resolution photograph taken inside the dining room of her exclusive country club. The image showed a crystal dish filled with dark, glistening caviar resting on a bed of crushed ice. Next to the dish sat a heavy silver spoon and a flute of vintage champagne. The background was slightly blurred, but I could easily make out the lush green of the indoor tennis courts and the tailored uniforms of the club staff. Beneath the photograph was a single line of text. I hope you managed to secure a high-interest loan to cover Lily today. It would be a shame for the hospital to discharge her into the freezing snow. Do not bother asking us for a handout. We are celebrating Chase and his upcoming launch. I stared at the image. My thumb hovered over the screen, zooming in on the reflection in the silver spoon. I could see the distorted shapes of the country club chandeliers. Victoria was indulging in imported delicacies, actively mocking the presumed financial ruin of her own daughter. She delighted in the thought of her grandchild being thrown out of a cardiac ward. She felt invincible, insulated by the stolen funds securing her country club status. She and Chase were toasting their fabricated wealth, blinded by their own greed. I did not type a response. I did not waste my energy expressing outrage or demanding an apology. Emotional reactions were the currency my family traded in, and I refused to fund their egos. Instead, I opened the master control dashboard for the Virginia data center on my encrypted tablet. The interface displayed a live rendering of the facility infrastructure. Rows of green lights indicated active server racks. A steady stream of data usage metrics flowed down the right side of the screen, confirming that Ethereum was currently processing thousands of pre-launch transactions. I tapped the specific server block leased under my brother's corporate entity. A drop-down menu appeared, offering a list of administrative overrides. I bypassed the standard monitoring protocols and selected the physical power routing options. I did not hit the shutdown sequence. It was not the right moment. Cutting the power now would only cause a temporary outage, allowing Chase to pivot and find another host before his initial coin offering on Friday. I needed him to step onto the public stage.
I needed his investors to gather, his creditors to watch, and his mother to wear her finest diamonds. I altered the access permissions on the server block, stripping the local facility managers of their ability to reboot the system manually. I encrypted the primary power switch with a biometric lock tied directly to my personal clearance credentials. Only my thumbprint could restore the grid once the kill switch was activated. The trap was armed. The explosive was wired directly into the foundation of his digital empire. I locked the tablet and slipped it into my bag. Lily was recovering well in the pediatric suite upstairs, her vital signs strong and steady. The biological crisis was behind us, leaving my mind sharp and clear for the impending financial execution. Thursday morning approached. Ethereum's $100 million launch was exactly 24 hours away. My tablet chimed with a calendar alert regarding the Securities and Exchange Commission filing deadlines. Chase needed a clean balance sheet to secure federal approval for his public offering. He needed the stolen loans erased. He was going to need my signature. I sat beside Lily, watching her sleep, waiting for the inevitable arrival of my brother. He would not come alone, and he would not ask politely. He would attempt to use fear and intimidation, bringing a drafted legal waiver designed to strip away my rights. He would demand my compliance, assuming I was still the broken, terrified mother he had abandoned in the emergency room. He was about to walk directly into the snare I had spent my entire career learning how to build. Thursday morning broke with a dull gray light filtering through the horizontal hospital blinds. The rhythmic, reassuring pulse of Lily's cardiac monitor provided a steady soundtrack to the quiet recovery suite. My daughter slept soundly, her small chest rising and falling, a faint wash of healthy color finally returning to her cheeks. The heavy wooden door swung open without a warning knock. The sterile metallic scent of the medical ward was instantly swallowed by the sharp, suffocating notes of heavy floral perfume and roasted espresso. Victoria walked in first, her pristine beige trench coat brushed against the edge of the sterile tray table. She did not glance at her granddaughter resting in the hospital bed, her eyes locked directly onto me, cold and devoid of any maternal warmth. Chase trailed right behind her. He ignored the medical equipment, his thumb swiping frantically across his smartphone screen. He tapped the crystal face of his gold Rolex, his jaw tight, radiating a frantic, nervous energy. Trailing a few steps behind my family was a third individual. He wore an ill-fitting gray suit that wrinkled sharply at the elbows. A thin sheen of sweat coated his upper lip, and he clutched a cheap vinyl briefcase tightly against his ribs. He did not look like a top-tier corporate attorney. He looked like a back-alley fixer hired for a discreet, dirty job. "Wake up, Maya," Chase ordered, his voice echoing too loudly in the quiet room. "We have a strict schedule to keep today." I sat up slowly from the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside Lily's bed, keeping my expression carefully guarded. "Keep your voice down. She just came out of a major cardiac procedure." Chase rolled his eyes, shoving his phone into his tailored trousers. "The opening bell on Wall Street rings in exactly 24 hours. The Securities and Exchange Commission auditors are currently crawling through Ethereum's final ledger. They flagged the high-interest shadow loans tied to your Social Security number." He snapped his fingers at the man in the gray suit. The fixer jumped slightly, snapping his briefcase open with trembling hands. He pulled out a single, crisp sheet of legal paper and placed it on the edge of my chair. "This is a liability waiver," Chase stated, tapping the header of the document. "It formally declares that you voluntarily authorize me to utilize your identity and credit lines for my business ventures. It reclassifies the stolen funds as a willing familial investment. The SEC requires a clean balance sheet with zero outstanding legal liabilities tied to the founder before they approve the public offering tomorrow." I looked down at the paper. The printed text was a blatant shield designed to erase his federal crimes. Signing it would legally absolve him of identity theft and pin the entire crushing weight of the shadow debt directly onto my shoulders. I looked back up, letting my shoulders tense. I shook my head, keeping my voice low and brittle. I cannot sign this, Chase. You drained my accounts. I have nothing left to give you. Victoria stepped forward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She stood between me and Lily's bed, using her physical presence to block my view of my daughter. You will sign it, Victoria commanded, her tone dropping into a chilling, calculated register. Your brother is on the verge of cementing this family's legacy. You will not drag his launch down with your petty financial complaints. I shrank back against the vinyl chair, playing the cornered victim. The creditors will come after me. I will be ruined. Victoria unclasped her leather handbag. She retrieved her smartphone, her thumb hovering deliberately over the glowing screen. Let us review your current reality, Maya, Victoria said, her gaze sweeping over my tired clothes and the hospital surroundings. You are an unemployed single mother. Your bank accounts are frozen. You are currently drowning in six-figure medical debt, and you have no primary health insurance. She stepped closer, the harsh scent of her perfume burning my throat. Child Protective Services takes a very dim view of negligent parents who are financially incapable of providing basic medical care for a child recovering from major heart surgery, Victoria whispered. I have the direct number for the state director saved right here. One phone call from a concerned, wealthy grandmother detailing your unstable financial environment, and the state will place Lily into an emergency foster system before her discharge papers are even printed. The threat hung in the air, toxic and heavy. My own mother was leveraging the state welfare system, using a recovering 4-year-old child as a bargaining chip to secure a fraudulent cryptocurrency launch. I did not argue. I did not scream at her to leave. I simply let the internal switch flip. I forced my breathing to turn ragged and shallow. I allowed my lower lip to tremble. I let a sudden, desperate tear spill over my eyelashes and trace a hot path down my cheek. I pulled my knees to my chest, curling into a tight, defeated ball. Please, I choked out, forcing a wet, ragged sob to break through my throat. Please, Mom, do not call them. Do not take her away from me. Chase let out a harsh sigh, shaking his head in deep annoyance. Save the pathetic drama, Maya. Just pick up the pen and sign the document. We do not have time for a therapy session today. The man in the gray suit pulled a heavy silver pen from his pocket. He held it out to me, refusing to meet my eyes. I reached out. My fingers shook so violently I bumped the edge of the clipboard, nearly dropping the pen onto the floor. I let out another fractured sob, wiping my wet cheeks with the back of my sleeve. I took the silver pen, my hand hovering over the dotted line at the bottom of the liability waiver. I pressed the ink to the paper. My tears flowed freely, but beneath the facade of a broken, terrified mother, my mind operated with the cold precision of a federal architect. I executed the signature. I signed my full legal name, but as the silver pen reached the final letter, I added 2 small, distinct cursive characters, seamlessly woven into the ending flourish. V.C. It stands for V coactus, Latin for having been forced or under duress. To an arrogant tech bro and a cheap, back-alley fixer rushing to meet a deadline, it just looked like a messy, emotional stroke of ink. But it was actually a prearranged distress signal. Because of my federal security clearance, I had already directly alerted my contacts at the SEC Enforcement Division and the FBI. I gave them the exact tracking details of his IPO ledger. They weren't just going to stumble upon it, they were actively waiting for him to submit it. The second the silver pen lifted from the paper, Chase snatched the clipboard away. He did not bother inspecting the ink. He simply verified that a name occupied the blank space. He handed the document to the fixer, a triumphant sneer stretching across his face. File it with the SEC compliance officer immediately. Tell them the ledger is officially clean. Victoria slipped her phone back into her designer handbag. The cruel, threatening edge vanished from her posture, replaced by a smug, satisfied pride. Smart girl, Victoria murmured, looking down at me as I sat trembling in the vinyl chair.
You finally learn how to make a worthwhile sacrifice for this family." She turned on her heel and walked toward the exit. Chase followed, already dialing a number on his phone, barking orders to his startup team about the Friday launch preparations. The fixer hurried behind them, clutching the briefcase as if it held gold. The heavy hospital door clicked shut, sealing me in the quiet room once again. I sat motionless for exactly 10 seconds, listening to their footsteps fade down the corridor. Then I stopped trembling. I reached up and wiped the lingering tears from my face, erasing the helpless victim in a single smooth motion. My breathing returned to a slow, measured rhythm. I stood up, walked over to Lily's bed, and gently adjusted her soft blanket. Chase and Victoria thought they had just secured their billion-dollar future. They thought they had successfully bullied a desperate, financially ruined mother into wiping their slate clean. They failed to realize that by rushing to file that specific piece of paper, my brother was voluntarily hand-delivering a legally binding signed confession of extortion and financial fraud directly into an active, meticulously prepared federal sting operation. He was locking his own handcuffs just 24 hours before asking the public for $100 million. The snare was locked. The bait was swallowed. Tomorrow night, the stage would be set. Friday night descended on Manhattan, painting the financial district in shades of slate and gold. Inside a rented glass penthouse hovering 50 stories above Wall Street, the air hummed with the sound of clinking crystal flutes and the sharp scent of imported cologne. Chase stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, adjusting the cuffs of a bespoke Tom Ford suit. He projected the flawless image of a seasoned tech founder, smiling smoothly as he poured vintage champagne for a tight circle of venture capitalists and financial reporters. Just outside the immediate glow of the modern chandelier, a different group lingered. 3 men in ill-fitting dark suits stood near the balcony doors, their eyes tracking my brother's every move. They were not tech investors, they were the shadow lenders. They did not drink the champagne. They checked their phones, cross-referencing the time. They had provided the short-term capital that kept Ethereum from defaulting before the launch. If the initial coin offering failed to generate the required liquidity, they were not going to file a civil lawsuit in a sterile courtroom. They were going to seize everything Chase owned, including the suburban estate his mother had foolishly leveraged. The tension radiated from them, a dark, heavy undercurrent beneath the party's synthetic joy. Across the room, Victoria held court. Heavy diamond clusters hung from her neck, catching the light as she laughed at a joke made by a prominent hedge fund manager. She gestured proudly toward Chase, boasting about her Silicon Valley prodigy. "He has always possessed a visionary mind." Victoria lied smoothly to a group of eager journalists. While other children were playing games, Chase was studying market trends. "Our family believes in funding excellence, and Ethereum is the crown jewel of our legacy." She adjusted her necklace, soaking in the admiration of the room, insulated by a fortune that did not belong to her. In the corner, near the catering station, Chloe kept her head bowed. Chase had stripped away her dignity, forcing his wife to wear a stiff, cheap polyester serving uniform. She stood quietly, collecting empty glasses and wiping down the black marble counters. A wealthy guest bumped a tray, spilling a splash of red wine onto the floor. Victoria turned her harsh gaze toward her daughter-in-law. "Chloe, stop standing there looking useless," Victoria snapped, her voice carrying over the ambient jazz music. Mr. Sterling spilled his drink. "Fetch a towel and clean it up before someone ruins their shoes." Chloe bit her lower lip, her cheeks flushing with humiliation. She grabbed a white cloth and knelt on the hardwood floor, scrubbing the spill while the investors watched. Chase did not intervene. He did not look in her direction. He was too busy maintaining his fragile billionaire facade. Chloe kept her head down, but her eyes briefly flicked toward the entrance, waiting for the promise I had made to her in the hospital lobby. Dominating the center of the penthouse was a 100-inch LED display. The screen glowed with the sleek silver logo of Ethereum, beneath which a digital clock ticked relentlessly backward. 8 minutes until the initial coin offering went live. 8 minutes until $100 million of public money theoretically flooded into the fraudulent ecosystem. Chase checked his gold Rolex, a thin sheen of sweat visible along his hairline, despite the chilled air conditioning. He caught the eye of the lead shadow lender and gave a stiff practice nod of reassurance.
He needed this launch. He needed the public capital to erase his toxic debt and secure the Virginia servers before his creditors realized the company possessed zero actual assets. The digital clock shifted to 5 minutes. The chatter in the room began to quiet down. Guests turned their attention toward the glowing screen, raising their glasses in anticipation. The jazz music faded out. Chase stepped up to a small acrylic podium, tapping the microphone to deliver his victory speech. He cleared his throat, flashing a bright, camera-ready smile for the financial reporters holding their recording devices. He never got to say a single word. The heavy double oak doors at the entrance of the penthouse swung open. The brass handles hit the drywall with a sharp, resonant thud that silenced the room in a single heartbeat. I walked across the threshold. I did not look like the terrified, bankrupt mother they had bullied in the hospital. I wore a tailored navy blue suit with razor-sharp lapels. My posture was rigid, my chin held high, and my gaze locked directly onto my brother. The soft click of my heels echoed through the quiet penthouse. Flanking me on either side were 2 senior corporate litigators from Aegis Security. They moved with the synchronized, unyielding precision of military personnel, each carrying a thick leather briefcase packed with federal filings. The color drained from Victoria's face. Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The expensive liquid pooled around her designer heels, but she did not even look down. Chase gripped the edges of the acrylic podium. His knuckles turned stark white. He looked at me, then scanned the room, realizing that every tech reporter and major investor was now staring at the unexpected disruption. The curated launch party was unraveling before his eyes. He snapped his fingers, gesturing frantically to the 3 private security guards stationed near the elevators. "She is not on the guest list," Chase ordered, his voice pitching up, betraying his rising panic. "Escort her out of my event, right now." The guards moved without hesitation, stepping into my path to block my advance. The largest one reached out, intending to grab my shoulder and physically force me back into the hallway. I did not flinch. I did not break my stride. The litigator on my right stepped smoothly in front of me. He did not raise his fists or shout. He simply unbuttoned his suit jacket and pulled out a crisp, heavy document stamped with the raised blue seal of a United States federal judge. He held the document up, positioning it so the lead security guard could clearly read the bold text across the header. "You are looking at an active federal injunction issued by the Southern District Court," the lawyer stated, his voice a low, commanding baritone that carried effortlessly across the room. "This mandate prohibits any physical interference with my client. Restrict her movement or lay a single finger on her, and you will be detained by the United States Marshals waiting in the lobby." The second litigator on my left opened his leather briefcase. He pulled out a stack of pristine, certified financial ledgers and rested them calmly on the edge of a catering table, ready to deploy the data. The reporters in the room sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Several of them raised their cameras, their lenses focusing on my face. The security guards stopped dead in their tracks. They looked at the heavy blue seal, then glanced back at Chase. They were paid hourly wages to handle unruly party guests, not to commit federal offenses against corporate attorneys. The lead guard took a slow, deliberate step backward, clearing the path and lowering his hands. Chase watched his physical defense dissolve in seconds. He stood trapped behind his acrylic podium, the digital clock above him ticking down to 4 minutes. He had spent months stealing my identity to build a stage, and now he was forced to stand in silence as I walked right up to the center of it. Chase gripped the edges of the clear acrylic podium. His knuckles turned stark white against the plastic. The room remained hushed, the upbeat jazz music having faded into a tense, expectant silence. He looked at the federal injunction held by my attorney, then scanned the faces of the tech reporters, aiming their camera lenses at him. A single drop of sweat traced the line of his jaw, soaking into the stiff collar of his bespoke shirt. He forced a smile, stretching his lips over his teeth in a practiced, synthetic display of calm. He tapped the microphone, adjusting his stance to project authority. He announced to the room that he apologized for the unexpected interruption.
He introduced me as his estranged older sister, claiming I had been struggling with severe medical debt and personal issues for a long time. He spun a narrative for the press, stating I chose the eve of his initial coin offering to stage a public plea for financial assistance. He tried to generate pity, shaking his head with manufactured sorrow. Victoria stepped forward from her spot near the champagne fountain. She placed a hand over her heart, playing the tragic matriarch flawlessly. She murmured to a nearby hedge fund manager, asking him to excuse my behavior. She whispered that my daughter was in the hospital and the stress had fractured my judgment. She promised the investors that the family would get me the psychiatric help I needed. They wanted to drag me into an emotional debate, hoping I would scream or defend my mental state. Defending myself would strip away my leverage and reduce the confrontation to a petty family squabble. I offered them nothing. I ignored their bait entirely. My heels struck the polished hardwood floor, carrying me past the catering stations and directly toward the sunken velvet lounge area. This was where the primary venture capitalists and the shadow lenders were gathered. My physical movement shifted the focal point of the penthouse. The three men in the dark, ill-fitting suits watched me approach. Their eyes were cold, calculating the sudden shift in the room. I stopped at the edge of the velvet seating arrangement. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the clinical precision of an architect diagnosing a structural failure. I locked eyes with the lead venture capitalist. I stated that they were preparing to invest $100 million into a decentralized digital ledger. I told them they were sold a narrative of an untouchable distributed network, a system immune to localized failure. Chase panicked. He pointed frantically at the audiovisual technician stationed near the balcony. He ordered them to cut the sound system and demanded security remove me from the premises. I did not have a microphone. The acoustics of the glass penthouse carried my words effortlessly. The lead technician reached for the soundboard mixer, but my second litigator was already moving. He retrieved a localized override relay from his leather briefcase. It was a piece of restricted federal hardware designed to bypass commercial presentation firewalls. He walked smoothly to the primary media console, resting beneath the giant display, and plugged the device directly into the master input port. The 100-inch screen above Chase flickered. The sleek silver Ethereum logo and the ticking countdown clock vanished instantly. A stark blue diagnostic grid replaced the branding. The screen illuminated the penthouse, casting a cool, sterile glow over the faces of the investors. I turned my attention to the glowing display. I explained that a genuine decentralized blockchain relies on thousands of independent global nodes. If you trace the packet routing protocols of a true crypto exchange, the traffic splinters across continents. It bounces from Tokyo to Frankfurt to London. I pulled a thin silver tablet from my jacket pocket and tapped the screen. The large display mirrored my command. A live global routing map rendered above Chase. Lines of green data cascaded across the digital world map, representing every active pre-launch transaction on the Ethereum network. The investors leaned forward in their seats. The green lines did not scatter across the globe. They did not bounce between continents. Instead, every single data stream, every user ping, and every encrypted transaction funneled into one solitary, bright red coordinate. The map zoomed in, bypassing state lines and county borders, pinning the exact location. Ashburn, Virginia. I kept the pitch of my voice perfectly even. I announced that Ethereum was not a decentralized network. It was a localized structure running on a fractured foundation. I explained that to save the exorbitant costs required to host a genuine distributed ledger, their visionary founder cut a fatal corner. Every byte of data driving his company was stored inside a single physical data center in Virginia. Low, urgent whispers rippled through the crowd of financial reporters. The lead shadow lender narrowed his eyes, pulling a smartphone from his pocket. Chase gripped the microphone, his breathing ragged and uneven. He stammered, claiming it was merely a temporary hosting measure for the beta launch. The polished executive persona was cracking under the pressure. He tried to reassure the room, stating the company was migrating to a global cloud infrastructure right after the public offering. He called it standard startup procedure. I swiped my tablet again, slicing through his lie. The screen shifted to display federal bankruptcy court filings and unpaid utility ledgers for the Virginia warehouse. I corrected him. I stated it was a desperate lease agreement signed with a facility currently undergoing Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring. The host facility was drowning in operational debt, mere weeks away from facing rolling power grid shutoffs. I turned my gaze to Victoria. She stood frozen near the catering table, her heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. I explained to the room that securing server space inside a failing warehouse required immediate, high-interest capital. Traditional commercial banks declined the underwriting. The founder had to turn to unregulated private equity. I looked directly at the three men in the dark suits. I revealed that Chase borrowed against his mother's pristine suburban estate, forging her signature on a mezzanine lien to secure the cash. He used toxic debt to rent a sinking ship, betting everything on tonight's public offering to erase the paper trail. Victoria dropped her crystal glass. It shattered against the hardwood, sending shards of glass across the floor. Her hands flew to her mouth, the arrogant matriarch facade dissolving into sheer terror. She turned her wide, unblinking eyes toward her golden son, realizing he had wagered her sanctuary on a failing tech scam. The atmosphere in the penthouse turned lethal. The venture capitalists set their champagne flutes down on the marble tables. The lead investor crossed his arms, his jaw set in a rigid line. They realized the underlying asset they were about to purchase did not exist. The shadow lenders realized their collateral was tied to a fraudulent public offering. The tech reporters lifted their cameras, the rapid clicking of shutters recording the exact moment the billionaire prodigy myth evaporated, leaving behind an amateur thief draped in an expensive suit. In the corner of the room, Chloe stood perfectly still. A white serving cloth clutched in her hands. She watched her husband, the man who had tormented her and stolen her nursing wages, shrink behind the clear podium. The power he wielded over her was dissolving into digital ash. The digital numbers on the 100-inch display shifted from 4 minutes down to 3. The ambient hum of the penthouse had evaporated into a tight, breathless vacuum. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the distant lights of the Manhattan skyline blurred behind the falling snow. But inside the glass room, every eye remained fixed on the glowing countdown. Investors stood motionless, their smartphones unlocked, thumbs hovering over proprietary trading applications, waiting for the exact second the initial coin offering went live. The three men in the ill-fitting dark suits shifted their weight near the balcony doors. They did not care about the revolutionary technology. They cared about the liquidity required to satisfy their high-interest loan. If the launch failed to generate immediate cash, they were ready to seize the collateral. Chase stood behind the clear acrylic podium. His curated executive posture was fracturing. A thick bead of sweat carved a path down his temple, soaking into the starched white collar of his bespoke shirt. He kept his gaze locked on the ticking clock, refusing to look at the secondary screen where the routing map still exposed his centralized Virginia warehouse. He needed the clock to hit 0. He needed the influx of public money to blind the room to the structural truth. 60 seconds. Victoria stood frozen near the catering station. Her diamond necklace caught the sterile blue light emitting from the screens. She held a fresh crystal flute, but her knuckles were stark white around the delicate stem. She realized her suburban estate was currently hanging in the balance of this single digital launch. 30 seconds. The silence grew heavy, pressing against the eardrums. The two corporate litigators flanking me stood like stone statues, their leather briefcases resting near their polished shoes. I kept my posture rigid, my breathing slow and measured. I watched my brother cling to the acrylic edges of his podium, a man praying for a miracle built on stolen credit. 10, 9, 8. The venture capitalists leaned forward, tapping their screens to refresh their connection gateways. 3, 2, 1, 0. The large countdown clock vanished. The sleek silver Ethereum logo reappeared in the center of the display, spinning in a slow, rendered animation. Chase raised his hand, pointing a trembling finger toward the far corner of the penthouse, where his lead developer sat huddled over a cluster of sleek silver laptops. "Open the trading gates," Chase ordered, his voice cracking under the immense strain. The lead programmer hammered the enter key. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet room. 1 second passed. 2 seconds passed. The giant LED display remained stagnant. No trading volume populated the dashboard. No incoming capital metrics flashed across the screen. The proprietary trading apps held by the venture capitalists displayed endless loading circles. Chase slapped his palm flat against the podium. The acrylic cracked slightly under the impact.
Refresh the feed!
He snapped, glaring at the developers.
Push the launch protocol through right now!
The programmer hit his keyboard harder, his fingers flying across the deck.
I am pushing the command.
The young man stammered, his eyes darting frantically across his own monitor. The host is not responding to the ping. The handshake protocol is timing out.
A harsh electronic buzz pierced the tense atmosphere. The 100-inch monitor above the podium flickered twice. The sleek silver logo and the black background disappeared entirely. The screen flooded with a glaring blood-red hue. Bold white block letters materialized across the center of the massive display, casting a harsh crimson light over the faces of the investors. Server offline, connection refused. Chase abandoned his podium. He sprinted across the hardwood floor, shoving the lead programmer out of his leather chair. He gripped the edge of the desk, hammering his fists against the keyboard, entering administrative overrides and desperate reboot commands. Lines of code cascaded down the laptop screen, each line ending in a fatal error code. The network refused to acknowledge his credentials. The system rejected every attempt to access the primary ledger. The red glow washed over his tailored suit, painting him in the exact color of his impending ruin.
I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored navy jacket and withdrew my encrypted titanium tablet. I did not rush. I walked slowly toward the center of the sunken velvet lounge, stepping deliberately onto the space separating my brother from his wealthy audience. I tapped the biometric sensor on the edge of the device. The screen unlocked, bypassing the standard firewalls and opening the master control dashboard for the Tier 4 facility in Ashburn. Mirror my display to the primary feed, I instructed my lead litigator. The lawyer stepped forward, tapping a sequence into the override relay still plugged into the media console. The glaring red error message on the 100-inch screen vanished.
In its place, the investors saw a live, high-resolution schematic of a concrete data center. Row after row of server racks rendered in sterile gray graphics filled the display. Above each isolated block of servers, a blinking status indicator flashed a stark warning. Power disconnected. Physical lockdown engaged. Chase spun around from the laptops, his chest heaving, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. He stared at the schematic, his brain struggling to process the architecture of his own leased hardware. "What did you do?" he gasped, his voice barely a hollow rasp. I held the tablet up, ensuring the master control interface was visible to the venture capitalist standing nearby. As the sole legal owner of the Virginia data center, I stated, keeping my tone flat, clinical and devoid of any familial warmth. I executed a critical facility security breach protocol. I sealed the physical server racks housing your ledger. I deactivated the industrial cooling towers. I severed the hardline electrical grid feeding Ethereum. I lowered the tablet, holding my brother's terrified gaze. I just flipped the physical switch to your empire, Chase. The murmurs in the room died out. The venture capitalists stared at the schematic, digesting the cold, hard data. They were not looking at a temporary software bug or a minor routing error. They were looking at a permanent hardware execution. The infrastructure required to process their investments was sitting in a dark, powerless warehouse owned by a hostile architect. The lead venture capitalist slid his phone back into his tailored pocket. He buttoned his suit jacket, signaling the end of his interest. He turned his back on the podium and walked toward the coat check. The other investors followed his lead, recognizing a dead asset when they saw one. Near the balcony doors, the three shadow lenders exchanged a single, grim look. They did not care about the server schematics. They cared about the math. The collateral they held was tied to a ghost ship. They began moving slowly toward the center of the room, their target shifting from the failed tech founder to the mother who had signed the mezzanine lien. On the bottom corner of the massive display, a small sidebar maintained a live feed of Ethereum's pre-market valuation based on the pending coin offering. It sat at a staggering $100 million.
Without active servers, the underlying network evaporated. The valuation algorithm updated, searching for connected nodes and finding nothing but dead air. The 9-figure number dropped. It did not bleed out slowly over a matter of hours. It plummeted with the ruthless efficiency of raw data. 90 million. 50 million. 10 million.
In exactly 4 seconds, the valuation counter hit a flat, unremarkable 0. Chase stared at the round digit. The polished, untouchable Silicon Valley persona disintegrated. His legs folded beneath him. He hit the glass floor hard. His hands scrambled against the smooth surface, trying to find purchase where there was none. His knees knocked together, a rapid, uncontrollable tremor shaking his entire frame. He looked up at me from the ground, his jaw slacked, a thin line of saliva gathering at the corner of his mouth. He was no longer a CEO. He was a thief who had just been caught holding an empty bag in a room full of dangerous creditors. The glowing 0 on the 100-inch display cast a harsh, unforgiving light across the penthouse. Chase remained on the glass floor, his chest heaving in erratic, shallow gasps. The curated atmosphere of elite success had evaporated, leaving behind a cold vacuum of impending ruin. Victoria stood frozen by the catering station. Her gaze darted from the kneeling figure of her son to the silent investors heading toward the coat check. The realization that her sprawling suburban sanctuary hung in the balance snapped her out of her stupor. Survival instinct overrode her manufactured aristocratic grace. She dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the hardwood, sending sharp fragments scattering across the floor, but she ignored the mess. She plunged her hand into her designer leather tote bag. Her manicured fingers fumbled through the compartments until she gripped the crisp edge of the liability waiver. She yanked the document out, holding it high above her head like a protective shield. "Wait!" Victoria commanded, her voice shrill, echoing off the glass walls. She rushed toward the center of the room, intercepting a group of tech reporters and core investors who were waiting for the elevators. "Do not leave! You are witnessing a hysterical episode! My daughter is unwell." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is a disgraced, unemployed, single mother, drowning in 6-figure medical debt. The stress of her daughter being in the hospital has fractured her mind. She is trying to sabotage this launch out of pure, unadulterated jealousy because Chase built an empire while she amounted to nothing." I maintained my rigid posture, offering no emotional response to her frantic defamation. I let her spin her desperate web. Victoria waved the printed waiver in the air, the paper crinkling loudly. "We have the legal documentation right here. She signed this waiver just yesterday morning in front of witnesses. She formally authorized Chase to utilize her credit lines. She transferred the assets willingly. We submitted this exact document to the Securities and Exchange Commission to prove the ledger is clean. We will sue her for defamation and corporate sabotage. Chase is the victim here." The investors stopped walking, their eyes narrowing as they looked at the paper in her hand. The lead shadow lender stepped forward, his expression unreadable, waiting to see if the paper held any actual legal weight. My lead corporate litigator stepped smoothly past me. He did not shout. He did not display a single ounce of anger. He moved with the precise, calculated rhythm of a predator closing in on trapped prey. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, reached into his inner pocket, and produced a certified digital printout. "That is a fascinating narrative, ma'am," the litigator stated, his deep baritone carrying effortlessly through the quiet penthouse. "However, the federal government tends to prioritize empirical data over family drama." He stopped just a few feet away from Victoria. He held up his printed document so the reporters could catch the official seal on their cameras. "What you are holding is indeed a liability waiver. And as you so helpfully confirmed just now, your son submitted that exact document to the Federal Regulatory Commission to secure public investor capital." The litigator offered a chilling clinical smile. "But if you look closely at the ink on the bottom line, you will notice a distinct anomaly in the penmanship. The curvature of the letters is flattened, the secondary loops are missing, the final stroke is jagged." Victoria frowned, lowering the paper slightly to stare at the blue ink. Her breathing hitched.
My client did not sign her legal name. The litigator continued, delivering the fatal blow. She executed a registered honeypot signature. It is a classified deliberate forgery filed directly with the Department of Defense years ago to serve as a silent distress signal for coercion and identity theft. Chase let out a strangled, agonizing sound from the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hands pulling at his own hair, realizing the trap had been set long before he even walked into the hospital room. By taking that specific piece of paper and submitting it to the Federal Commission, the lawyer explained, his voice devoid of any mercy. Your son did not clean his financial ledger. He formally submitted documented proof of coercion. He committed level 1 securities fraud, attempting to raise $100 million using a known fraudulent instrument. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but no sound materialized. The heavy oak double doors at the penthouse entrance swung open once again. The men who walked through the threshold did not wear tailored suits. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with stark yellow lettering printed across their chests. They were a specialized extraction team from the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern, weathered face, bypassed the silent security guards and strode purposefully into the center of the room. The atmosphere shifted from a tense corporate dispute to a severe criminal takedown. Chase, the lead agent called out, his tone projecting uncompromising federal authority. Chase slowly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the agents, then up at me, his expression pleading for a mercy he would never receive. He tried to push himself off the glass floor, his knees trembling so severely he could barely stand. The agents did not hesitate. 2 officers flanked him immediately. They grabbed his arms, forcing them behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the penthouse was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the definitive sound of mathematics overriding manipulation. The lead agent recited the Miranda rights with practiced monotone efficiency, detailing the charges of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and securities manipulation. In the corner of the room, still wearing her cheap serving uniform, Chloe stood perfectly still. She watched the man who had tormented her, the man who had stolen her nursing wages and trapped her in a cycle of financial abuse, being marched toward the exit in irons. A slow, profound exhale escaped her lips. The heavy, invisible chains binding her to him shattered into dust. Victoria finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. Seeing her golden son, the supposed tech prodigy, being physically restrained by law enforcement shattered the final remnants of her sanity.
Take your hands off him!
Victoria shrieked, dropping the useless liability waiver onto the floor. She lunged forward, but a secondary agent stepped into her path, holding up a firm, warning hand. "You are making a terrible mistake!" Victoria yelled, her face flushed dark red, tears of fury streaking her expensive makeup. "Do you know who we are? We have endless resources. I will call my private legal team right now. I will mortgage my suburban estate and hire the most ruthless defense attorneys in New York. I will tie this department up in so much litigation, you will all lose your badges." The lead shadow lender, who had been watching the entire execution in silence, finally stepped out of the shadows. He walked over to Victoria, buttoning his dark, ill-fitting suit jacket. He did not look angry. He looked like a man evaluating a ledger that had just hit zero. "You are not going to mortgage anything," the shadow lender stated, his voice a low, grating rasp. Victoria spun around, glaring at the man. "Excuse me? I own a pristine, multi-million-dollar property, free and clear. I can liquidate it tomorrow." "You signed a mezzanine lien to secure the server funding for this fraudulent company," the lender reminded her, pulling a folded legal notice from his pocket. "The terms of that specific shadow loan required a balloon payment upon the execution of tonight's initial coin offering. Your son just failed to launch the network. The company valuation is zero. The debt is officially in default." Victoria stared at the folded paper, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw breath. "Because you authorized the property as hard collateral," the lender continued, stepping closer to deliver the final verdict.
Our firm is executing the accelerated default clause. We are filing the formal foreclosure notice with the county court tomorrow at dawn. Your son's company is worthless, meaning you have absolutely no liquidity to fight us. The property will be legally seized and liquidated. The reality of her situation hit Victoria with the force of a physical blow. She looked at the handcuffs on her son's wrists. She looked at the abandoned liability waiver on the floor. She looked at the dark Manhattan skyline outside the glass windows, realizing she had nowhere left to go. Her country club status, her arrogant pride, and her physical sanctuary had all been erased in a matter of minutes. She had wagered her entire existence on her son's toxic ambition, and the house had just collected its debt. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the polished hardwood, the heavy diamond necklace around her throat clinking sharply against the floorboards, leaving her kneeling in the ruins of her own creation. The glaring red error message on the screen bathed the penthouse in a harsh crimson light. Chase remained on the glass floor, his bespoke suit twisted and bunched around his shaking frame. The federal agents secured the steel cuffs around his wrists. The metallic click echoed sharply, yet his bloodshot eyes stayed locked onto my face. He ignored the federal officers pulling him upward. He ignored his mother weeping by the catering station. He begged for the servers. He pleaded with me to restore the power grid, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. He stammered about the men in the dark suits standing near the balcony. He knew federal prison offered safety compared to the shadow lenders waiting to collect their defaulted collateral. He dropped his weight, forcing the agents to drag him by his armpits. He stretched his bound hands toward my shoes, sobbing about the ruthless debt collectors who would hunt him down the second he posted bail. I looked down at his tear-stained face. Victoria sat a few feet away, her posture crumbling. The matriarch who had threatened to summon Child Protective Services to steal my daughter now slumped against the base of a marble table. The private equity firm was going to systematically strip her of her suburban estate. She stared blankly at her own reflection in a puddle of spilled champagne. She realized her days of sleeping in a multi-million-dollar mansion were permanently over. She owned nothing but massive debt. She reached up and unclasped her heavy diamond necklace, her fingers trembling as she weighed the stones in her palm. The clasp scratched against her neck. It was the only asset she had left to pawn for a cheap motel room. Her carefully curated high society persona dissolved into the ruined makeup streaking her cheeks. They expected a dramatic monologue. They waited for me to gloat, to scream about the stolen Social Security number, or to demand a weeping apology for the hospital waiting room. Their entire social dynamic thrived on emotional outbursts and chaotic confrontations. I offered them a barren void. I did not shed a single tear from my mother losing her sanctuary. I did not offer a shred of moral preaching to my brother. I stepped around Chase as if he were a discarded piece of broken furniture blocking my path. My low heels struck the polished floor with a steady metronomic rhythm. I walked right past Victoria. She reached a shaking hand out toward my ankle, opening her mouth to beg for a fraction of her old life back. I did not break my stride. I left her hand grasping at empty air. They were erased from my ledger. The toxic liability was permanently severed. I walked toward the dim corner of the penthouse. Chloe stood frozen near the caterer prep station. She still wore the stiff polyester serving uniform her husband had forced upon her to humiliate her in front of the Wall Street elite. She held a white cloth towel in her hands, her knuckles stark white from gripping the fabric. She watched the FBI agents haul Chase toward the exit in irons. She watched the man who had stolen her nursing paychecks and stripped away her dignity face his own ruin. She took a slow, deep breath. Her rigid shoulders dropped. The invisible chains binding her to his financial abuse fractured and fell away. I stopped right in front of her. I unzipped the inner compartment of my leather bag. I bypassed the encrypted titanium tablet and pulled out a thick, sealed manila folder. I held it out to her. Chloe looked at the folder, then up at my face, her dark eyes wide with confusion. She slowly took the envelope, her fingers brushing against the heavy paper. I told her to open it. She peeled back the flap and slid the documents out into the dim light. The first page was a property deed,
It outlined the transfer of ownership for a highly secure two-bedroom apartment in a premium downtown building. The property was fully paid off, with association fees and property taxes covered for the next decade. The second document was a certified bank draft establishing an independent trust fund. The balance read $5 million. I had instructed my legal counsel to wire the funds directly from my personal $30 million buyout payment. The legal framework of the trust ensured the assets were shielded from any future divorce proceedings. The money belonged to one name only: Chloe. Chloe stared at the numbers printed on the official bank stationery. Her hands began to shake, the papers rustling loudly in the quiet corner. She looked up at me, a single tear spilling over her eyelashes and tracing a path down her cheek. She tried to push the folder back into my hands, whispering that she could not accept such a fortune. She insisted she was just trying to do the right thing at the clinic. I gently pushed her hands back toward her chest, folding her fingers over the documents. I told her she earned every cent the night she walked through a freezing blizzard to hand a desperate mother a vintage gold ring. Her sacrifice provided the moral clarity I needed to execute the structural demolition of her husband. I looked her in the eyes and spoke softly. "You are free now." The penthouse descended into a chaotic symphony behind us. The lead FBI agent recited the final lines of the Miranda warning, his voice a flat baritone cutting through the room. Victoria finally found her voice. She shrieked my name, demanding I come back and fix the disaster I had orchestrated. Her wails echoed off the glass walls, a desperate, hollow sound of a woman realizing her supreme authority was a total illusion. The shadow lenders buttoned their coats and walked out, ignoring her cries entirely. Their exit signaled the end of her suburban sanctuary. I turned my back on the noise. I walked through the heavy oak double doors and stepped into the private elevator. I pressed the lobby button. The metal door slid shut, instantly silencing the screams of my mother and the frantic pleading of my brother. The ride down was smooth and quiet. I watched the floor numbers descend, each flashing digit stripping away another layer of the betrayal I had carried since the hospital. I stepped out of the high-rise building and onto the Wall Street pavement. The New York winter air hit my face. It was biting, crisp, and incredibly clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing wind. The suffocating scent of heavy floral perfume and roasted espresso was gone. I hailed a passing taxi and gave the driver the address for the Pediatric Cardiac Center. The ride across the city was peaceful. I watched the streetlights blur past the window, my mind clear and my pulse steady. I walked through the sterile hospital lobby, bypassing the billing desk where this entire war had started just a few days ago. The clerk did not even look up from her monitor. I took the elevator to the intensive care recovery floor. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and clean linens. I quietly pushed open the door to the private suite. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp. The rhythmic hum of the medical machines had slowed to a reassuring, healthy tempo. Lily was no longer lying flat. She was sitting up against a pile of soft pillows, holding a small stuffed bear. The intrusive tubes had been removed from her arms. When the door clicked shut, she turned her head. A bright, genuine smile spread across her face. The healthy flush of color had returned to her cheeks, vibrant and full of life. I walked over to the bed and leaned down, wrapping my arms gently around her small frame. I rested my chin on the top of her head, closing my eyes. The empire built on stolen identity and fragile servers was reduced to ash, leaving my world secure, protected forever by the cold, unyielding power of data. The story of Maya taking down her brother Chase and her mother Victoria offers profound lessons about survival, power, and the true meaning of family. When we face severe betrayal from the people who are supposed to protect us, it is easy to let grief destroy our lives. However, this narrative reveals exactly how to turn heartbreak into victory. Here are 5 crucial lessons we can learn from this journey. First, true family is defined by loyalty and not by biological blood. We are often conditioned to forgive toxic relatives simply because we share the same last name. Maya learned the hard way that her mother and brother viewed her only as a disposable financial asset. Meanwhile, Chloe,
A woman bound to the family only by marriage risked her own physical safety in a freezing blizzard to offer her most precious heirloom. Family is about who shows up for you in your darkest hour, not who stands next to you in holiday photographs. Second, emotional detachment is your greatest weapon against narcissistic manipulation. Toxic individuals thrive on your panic and your tears. They want you to scream and beg because it makes them feel powerful and in control. When Maya received that devastating phone call in the hospital, she did not break down. She immediately shifted from a grieving mother into a calculated architect. By removing her emotions from the battlefield, she maintained the sharp mental clarity required to build a flawless trap. Third, true power lies in silent observation and data. Chase built a fake empire using loud, arrogant buzzwords and expensive tailored suits. He wanted everyone to believe he was a visionary. Maya understood that wealth and security are built on solid infrastructure and undeniable facts. She used cold, hard data to trace his vulnerabilities. Never mistake a person staying quiet for a person being weak. While Chase was loudly bragging to his investors, Maya was silently buying the concrete floor beneath his feet. Fourth, arrogance will always create fatal blind spots. The villains in this story failed because they severely underestimated their victim. Victoria and Chase firmly believed that because Maya was a struggling single mother, she lacked the intelligence and resources to fight back. Their overconfidence caused them to blindly submit a forged federal document to government regulators. When you constantly look down on people, you never see the trap they are setting right in front of you. Fifth, financial independence is the key to permanent freedom. Abuse thrives in environments of strict economic control, exactly like the terrible situation Chloe endured. Maya was able to execute her brilliant demolition only because she had spent years building her own secure career and federal contracts. Securing your own resources ensures that no one can ever force you into submission using a bank account. If you found these lessons powerful and want to hear more incredible stories of survival and justice, please subscribe to Sweet Life Drama today. Drop a comment below and let us know which of these 5 lessons resonated with you the most.